how are you supposed to study consciousness? Like, how is that even a valid field of inquiry? And I'm like, well, I'm aware and you're aware. So what's up with that, right? Like when I was born into awareness, and they were like, nobody studies that. So then my inquiry was, well then where can I go to study consciousness? And that's what led me to neuroscience. What motivates me is I want to understand the pain and the suffering that are so endemic to the experience of being racialized in the United States. I wanted to know, what does it take to heal? And the idea arose for me that maybe the phenomenon of social justice and well-being were one and the same thing.
It is my pleasure to invite and welcome Dr. Sará King here, my dear sister, to the Acosta Institute Conversation Series. I know this phenomenon for some time now, and just really grateful to have you part of this conversation, sister. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Always, always. When I'm here with you, I'm solid.
You know, you've been traveling a lot lately. You know, I can't keep track. You're like the Carmen Sandiego.
I knew you were gonna say Carmen Sandiego.
You know, you were in Australia at a compassion conference. Then you were at the trauma summit conference in Oxford. You know, then you were recently with Dr. Bayo Komolafe and Resma Menachem and Sadia Hartman and so many other distinguished scholars at this really unique festival called Vunja, and so much more that I'm not even naming. But how does it feel at this point in your career? Just how does this land? You know, I met you when you had come out of your doctoral program and you joined what was at the time the Garrison Institute Fellowship, and just so proud of you in terms of how you've grown. Just how do you feel right now in terms of your trajectory, your development?
I'm going to use one word, and it's miraculous. I'm living in a miracle. I'm living the unexpected, the improbable. And I'm actually, in this moment, okay, so I went to high school partially in Minneapolis. And then that was for the first part of high school. For the second part of high school, I finished in Compton. I went to King Drew Medical Magnet High School, right? And it was really a very extraordinarily unique experience to be in the heart of Compton, right next door to King Drew Hospital. And the school was all Black and brown. And, you know, students who were aspiring to become doctors and in the medical field and in the scientific fields one day. But I came from a background where I experienced a lot of trauma. And as a 15-year-old kid, as a 16-year-old kid, when you've been through experiences like being chronically unhoused, and actually I want to take the time to name myself as a survivor. Experiencing domestic abuse and violence in the home, you know, really a lot of uncertainty, a lot of violence, around me. And I remember the school administrator, I had this vibrant memory of walking, one day I was working for the OBGYN clinic as a high school student, but I also had a habit of skipping school a lot. Because I was in a lot of pain, you know, and I was an all-star student. I got like straight A's, but I was holding so much trauma inside of my body, and so I would get reactive. You know, that's what kids do. And this woman pulled up next to me in her car and asked me to get in. She was a school administrator, right? I get in the car because I'm thinking, you know, I know you. And I get in the car and she looks at me and she says, I want to tell you something. I'm like, I'm amped. She says, I want you to know that I've been watching you and your behavior, and I know what you're up to. And she leans in real close. Her name was Miss Marlborough. I'm remembering this now. She leans in real close and she says, I want you to know that you are never going to make anything out of yourself in this life. She said, I've seen thousands of you, and your type, your kind, you're going nowhere. Don't you forget that. And she got quiet, and I got quiet. I looked at her, I nodded my head, and that gave me a lot of fire in that moment. You know, I was like, okay, you're seeing the surface. You're seeing the pain that I am in, and you are exerting power and authority in this moment. And you just watch. You just watch who I become. So to sit on this sofa next to you and to be walking into rooms, you know, as a Black woman, as a Black person, where people respect and wish to hear what I have to say on the basis of the things that I have been able to accomplish in this life. You know, that is a divine blessing, and that really is the power of all of my ancestors speaking through me and all of their dreams deferred that I'm living in this body. And I'm very clear about that.
Yeah. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge your unhoused and you know, domestically abused experience as a young girl, and just taking a moment to acknowledge that must have been a lot to carry. And it's really unfortunate how oftentimes the adults around us just don't affirm us, you know, and fall to in this case racial bias. But I'm really grateful that somehow, some way in your bones, you committed to a different kind of trajectory than the one expected.
Yes. Yes.
And when I met you, you had just come out of a doctoral program. You were in a postdoc, and so I'm just kind of blown away by learning more and more about your story before, like in high school and middle school, and even kind of early college. And just tell me a little bit about like what led you to study anthropology, to study neuroscience. Like what led you, you know, especially neuroscience in particular, such a predominantly white field.
Yeah. I think I want to start actually with undergrad. Maybe something that a lot of people don't know about me was when I went into undergrad, I thought I'm going to become an MD. So I was like sitting in these pre-med courses, and it was like this very, I went to Pitzer College, one of the Claremont colleges. And I was staggered by the wealth. I had never been around the children of millionaires and billionaires, you know, and it was like, it was their clothing and it was their dress and it was the opulence of the campus. And, you know, as a chronically unhoused youth, I just really had not been exposed to that kind of culture. So there was something about the way that I received that dominance that was like very intimidating to me. And it was like mostly white students. And I started to have a crisis inside of myself, you know, where I was like, how am I ever supposed to enter into this hospital system? And I literally was considered to be a ward of the court. So when you're unhoused and you don't have parents, you literally belong to the state. If your parents haven't claimed you, if they're not taking care of you, and that was the case for me. So I was classified as a homeless or unhoused student in college. And I'm in these classrooms with these like kids of millionaires and billionaires, and I was like, yo, I might have to drop out. Like, I don't know, who did I think I was to come up in here and think that I was going to compete with them? And I took my first Black Studies class. And that completely changed the game. You know what I mean? Professor Laura Harris at Pitzer College, I want to give you a shout out if you're listening to this. Oh my goodness, it was a revelation because I realized in that moment that my entire K through 12 education, I'd never been given the opportunity to really systematically inquire into the question of what is Blackness? What is Blackness in relationship to the self? Where did this term Black people even come from? What's the historical and cultural and linguistic trajectory of our peoples from West Africa here to the United States? And really all throughout the African diaspora, and how do I fit into that? So really it was like this deep philosophical question of who am I that I hadn't been held in asking. And so I went through this journey. I changed my majors. And so I had a double major in Black Studies. And then because I was under the impression that Black Studies, and I want to say for those of you who are listening, Black Studies really is the study of embodied revolution. That is what that is, against all odds. Embodied revolution, spiritual revolution and perseverance, and the creation of personhood in the context of nation states which insist on our dehumanization.
You know, I'm thinking about, you and I were recently in Great Barrington, the home of W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes.
So he's just coming in the room right now as you're talking, and so I'm thinking about you having these early experiences, unhoused and navigating like really wealthy higher education context, and not only as a Black woman, but as someone who is coming from kind of lesser means financially. And I'm thinking about Du Bois's concept of double consciousness.
Yes.
And you know, the levels of double consciousness that you must have experienced. And I'm really feeling right now the really palpable, in a palpable way, what it must felt to just be in that space of like having this extraordinary potential to get access to that university and to be in the room with those students and those professors, yet also have this kind of material reality that really stood against that environment, in addition to your racialized body. So I'm just kind of taking a moment just to feel into like what that must have felt like for you.
Yeah, I would say that all of the complexities of these intermingling experiences was like an initiation. And I'm sure maybe you had experiences like that.
Indeed, yeah.
At Columbia. I mean,
Yeah,
come on, right?
For sure,
Right?
for sure.
But some of my professors were literally ex-Black Panthers. And my mother was a part of the Black Panthers as well. As a child, I grew up listening to her telling me stories about, you know, her experiences with folks like Alice Walker and Angela Davis, who were in her social setting. As a young Black college student, initially she attended Amherst College on the East Coast, and then she transferred to University of Texas, I believe. And that was when the Vietnam War broke out. And when the Vietnam War broke out, my mother decided to drop out of college with her boyfriend, my brother's father, because they were drafting young Black men into a war against brown folks across the world. And they could really see the institutionalized racism that was inherent in that. So this form of like protest and conscientious objection to domination is really it was the milieu in which I grew up as a child. So then having professors who had reached, Black professors who were also Black Panthers, who had reached this level of success in their careers, it was really providing like a mirror to me about what was possible. But I was still under the impression that Black studies in and of itself was not going to be considered to be enough. for me to build a career off of. So then I started to major in linguistics because I really wanted to understand, partially inspired by W.E.B. Du Bois's concept of double consciousness, right?
Interesting.
If we can be navigating through the world as Black people with multiple consciousnesses, right? We have our interior world that can be very private. It can be a shared experience with others in the diaspora, but we have our interior conception of self. Then there's the way that America perceives us, and we must respond with a certain kind of consciousness to that. What, I wondered, is the role of language in mediating this relationship of double consciousness? I had questions like, are there narratives that we hold dear to ourselves as Black people that allow us to embody liberation against all odds? But then perhaps we have to code switch and we have to adopt other ways of languaging ourselves within dominant paradigms in order that we can protect ourselves.
Of course. That's a pretty powerful inquiry. So you transition into linguistics as you were thinking about becoming an MD and being really kind of fortified by kind of your mom's lineage, but also the Black Panther party as well, and just kind of, you know, that Black Power movement that was so powerful.
Yes.
And then you make kind of the leap towards neuroscience and a PhD.
It didn't.
Damn, that's quite the momentum.
Well, linguistics is it's about the science and the mathematics of language. So really it is about, in a sense, you can see it as creating these equations that are representative of how language works around the world. Like, what are the relationships between all of the ways in which people articulate themselves? So I decided to focus on a certain phenomenon coming from West Africa. Our ancestors used to use what was called, it was called a copula, B. How you be? How you be, cousin?
Sure.
Yeah. You know what And even if I say that to you today, you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
How you be. So the reason why was this was coming directly from linguistic forms of expressing ourselves from West Africa. And notice that it is not how are you. How you be is a reference to your being, your existence, your emanation. And this got me really thinking about the relationship between language and consciousness itself. So when I got to grad school at UCLA and I was in the African American Studies department, I'm gonna back that up actually, because African American Studies was not allowed to be a department at UCLA because it wasn't considered to be a field worthy of study on its own in and of itself when I was there. So I'm straddling the Department of Linguistics, and I remember I went to my professors and I was saying to them, again, inspired by this work of W.E.B. Du Bois and this inquiry that I had, I said, what is the relationship between the experience of being racialized and consciousness as it has to do with language? And they were like, what? Consciousness? How are you supposed to study consciousness? Like, how is that even a valid field of inquiry? And I'm like, well, I'm aware and you're aware. So what's up with that, right? Like, when I was born into awareness, but racialization was a phenomenon that was placed upon me.
Indeed.
Within my beingness, racialization isn't actually like an inherent phenomenon. And they were like, nobody studies that. Like, that's not what we do here, right? So then my inquiry was, well, then where can I go to study consciousness? And that's what led me to neuroscience.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. You know, I feel like I know you, but you know, I just such a privilege to know these little, you know, nuanced turns that I didn't know specifically how you had kind of shifted the inquiry.
Yeah.
I also, if it's okay, just for a moment, because of, if you feel comfortable, because of how much I know you, and I really think that this conversation is, for me, an opportunity to give you the space to just give people insight into how complex and nuanced and dynamic your journey and thinking has been so far. And I just wanted to acknowledge your brother and your father as well. Those were really big experiences for you as well. I know you mentioned mom, but just wanted to throw that out there before jumping into deeper inquiry around neuroscience and how that shaped your framework around the science of social justice.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you know, I'm just now getting to a point of beginning to speak more publicly about these familial experiences that have really shaped the why I'm interested in what I'm interested in. And so I do feel comfortable just speaking to the fact that I think in graduate school, sometimes there is this conception that we're all coming in with the same experiences and the same desires. And so then we can be shaped and we can be molded by these institutions, right? But there isn't necessarily an acknowledgement that according to the bodies that we're living in, our experience of embodiment, the types of pain and suffering that we're carrying are going to be highly variable. So, you know, when I applied to get into the PhD program at UCLA, this is what I said in my application. And I was like, they're either gonna like never answer, they're gonna be like, who is this? Or they're gonna swing this door wide open, right? When I applied, I let them know. I said, firstly, this is who I am. I told them a lot of the details about my background that I just shared with you, but I also said, you know, my senior year of college, my older brother, Yeshaya, who I loved more than, I loved him like, and I still love him like life itself. Yeshaya had been incarcerated on and off throughout my life. Full stop. When you are a child and a family member of yours is locked away in a steel cage, it has an effect on your mind. You're like, wait, where are they? Why can't I visit them? What is happening to them? What on earth could they have done to deserve this treatment, right? I told them about him being placed into solitary confinement when I was really little, around like 6 years old. And my mother and I went to go visit him in this prison, and when we were told that he was in solitary confinement, then it started this really deep philosophical inquiry in me, because I was thinking about, okay, he's in a box, there's no light, there's no one around him. And I really started to wonder, where does that concept of imprisonment or the carceral state even come from? Like, where is the logic that those of us who are suffering deeply and in pain and are acting from this place of pain, we have to lock them away from society rather than to rehabilitate them? Because I knew that Yeshaya was like in a lot of, he had experienced a lot of trauma and he needed help. He was getting the opposite of that. I put that in my application. And I also let them know that, and here's maybe where things might get a little bit uncomfortable for some of you who are listening, but this is a lived reality for a lot of Black people in the United States, right? So it's important that it be spoken to,
of course.
right? I put in my application that during my senior year of college, he had gotten into an altercation with the LAPD. He was followed by them in his car, and he did not make it out of that alive. This, to me, was a very clear-cut instance of police brutality. And maybe those words, police brutality, they might land in a certain way for folks, but period, point blank, if you come into an experience with the police of some time, you come into contact with them and you don't make it out alive, then I really don't know what else to call that, right? And this really tying into a centuries-old experience that Black people have had here in the United States from its inception. So literally, as I was getting my acceptances into my master's program, he was taken out of this world. And that was my lived experience. There was no way around it. There was no sugarcoating it. There was no, let me pretend like this isn't the case. It was like, there was like with tragedy, there is this finality of here's who you were before, here's the tragedy, here's who you are afterwards. There's a split. You are no longer the same. And I put that in my PhD application, and I said, what motivates me is I want to understand the pain and the suffering that are so endemic to the experience of being racialized in the United States. I want to understand how systemic systems are built to oppress and divide and separate us. And then more than that, right? Because I had come through the field of critical race theory and philosophy and linguistics and, and I had that undergirding to my thought, but I wanted to know, and this reminds me of the title of Prentice Hemphill's new book, What Does It Take to Heal? In our bodies, in our minds, with our consciousness. So when I got that acceptance letter, I was like, all right, you opened up the doors now, UCLA. You opened up the doors now,
Yeah, just sending energy to Jeshaya and his spirit. Yeah. Another quick question before we dive into kind of the legacy that you're leaving behind and you're working on in terms of neuroscience. Was your daughter Dahlia born by that time? During the masters?
Yes,
So you were also a mother.
I was also a mother.
Just to add the multiple layers of lived experience here.
Yeah.
That you're also contending with, experiencing precarity in terms of housing and vulnerability there. Your brother practically, being murdered, and then you're also becoming a mom,
Yeah.
and you have these big dreams of exploring the relationship between racialized identities and consciousness towards the direction of neuroscience. So just wanted to highlight another piece there.
Yeah. Thank you. I actually dropped out of my master's program because midway through, because I was frustrated at the types of supports that I was getting to study consciousness within that particular disciplinary context. So after I left grad school, I think this was in 2006. I was going to take a leave of absence for 3 months. I ended up going to the island of Hawaii because I was like, maybe I'll try and be a farmer. Maybe I just need to relax,
For real. Yeah.
And I ended up being away for 2.5 years. I thought that they weren't going to take me back. I had a baby, and I ended up writing the department, and they were like, come on back, like finish your master's degree. And so I literally had her like on a sling, carrying her into the classrooms and like finishing up my master's degree and then going into the PhD. And so, in a way, UCLA has been, for all of the many critiques we can leverage of higher institutions, they have always been extraordinarily supportive
Blessing.
of my work. So I want to put that out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of want to dive a little bit into your experience as a scholar in the field of neuroscience. And one of the things that you were able to create, inspired by your studies and your PhD, and then also after confronting and meeting the world post-doc, this theory and framework around the science of social justice.
Yeah.
So wanted to give you a little bit of space to just kind of think out loud around what that framework looks like, and also like how it came out of those concentrated studies in neuroscience.
Well, I appreciate you asking, and I never tire of telling the story because at UCLA, one of the things that was so extraordinary was I was allowed to fashion a truly interdisciplinary PhD. So this is how I was able to straddle the Department of Education, Anthropology, and Neuroscience simultaneously.
Too much
Oh
fun.
my gosh. I was showing up in these departments and they were like, so wait a minute, you're coming from where? And you're working with who? And you're doing what? And I was like, I'm just doing all the things, It was very fun. It was very exciting. And I really appreciate UCLA for being an institution that actually kind of puts their money where they're, puts their money behind supporting scholarship in this capacity. And I decided that, I really was interested in education that goes beyond the cognitive. Most of our curriculums inside of schools are designed to be met with the mind. But what this does is it perpetuates what some people call a Cartesian mind-body split. And we're living our lives from here up. And this is kind of like a disavowal of the importance of the body. So I really wanted to know, as I'm exploring this question of what does it take to heal systemic oppression, what does the body have to do with that? And in my own experience of just my journey of healing from some of the many traumas that I've described here, I had my own yoga and meditation practice. But let me tell you something. I would go to these yoga studios, right? And sometimes they would say things to me like, the purpose of yoga was to transcend the body. We're gonna somehow,
Escape.
yeah, we're gonna, I don't know, fly to another dimension or something. We're gonna become so spiritual. And to me, this was a deep-seated injustice. Because I'm like, when you've lived a life the way that I have lived, there ain't no flying off, to some kind of spiritual bypass. I am here now, on this land, living in the aftermath of colonization. So the type of suffering that I meet in my body is not one that I'm trying to run from. I want to learn how to compassionately meet with this suffering with awareness, in order that there might be the potential that this suffering can become a place of generativity and creativity, as we have always known, right? This is what our ancestors have always practiced. This is like the foundation of jazz, for instance. So when I decided to take the study of yoga and meditation into academia, and I wanted to know, is yoga and meditation as a form of what some scholars have called embodied cognition, embodied learning, is it happening for our youth of color? Are they receiving the benefit of it? And if so, how is that potentially transforming their experience of trauma? And when we talk about trauma, trauma is an embodied phenomenon.
Of course.
Right? And trauma, we're talking about the nervous system, we're talking about the brain, we're talking about the stress response, and how the stress response, the trauma response, is being mediated by the experiences that we have in this life. So that was the question that I was holding. And very interestingly, right, I admit I came with a little bit of bias.
Of course.
Right? I was like, oh man, when you look at the research, the mindfulness and the yoga, they're like, oh, increased compassion, increased empathy, decreased aggression, right? We definitely want those kids to be less aggressive, right? Increased altruism, it was like an advertisement for like a panacea of some kind at the time. This is where the research was at the time. So I theorized that we might see the same thing. And then I get into the context of the field in a middle school where, I'm actually not sure that I actually put this part in my dissertation. So I'm gonna give you the, I'm gonna give you the real deal. I'm gonna give you the real deal. This yoga and meditation intervention had been brought to this school, and this was a school in New Jersey where a lot of the students were experiencing being unhoused because of Hurricane Sandy. And the government response in terms of getting them what they needed in the aftermath was quite slow. These kids were experiencing a lot of gang violence in their neighborhoods, right? A lot of drugs that were like circulating around. But additionally, in terms of the school leadership, the principal of the school, and it hurts my heart, and it hurts my heart so profoundly. The principal of this school, right, these are 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, had engaged in sexual dynamics with one of his students, which is a trauma. It was a trauma for the student, significant. It was a violation of trust on every level, and it was a situation of collective trauma.
Of course.
For everyone involved, right? So they think we're going to bring in yoga and meditation, and the trauma is just going to,
go away. And
these kids, they were like, okay, some of the kids, sure, they were like, oh, in terms of the data, what the data showed, more compassion, more empathy, more connection with their community, 100%. But what I was interested in was this group of 12-year-olds who got together and developed a petition, and they were marching it around the school, and they were marching with signs, and they were gathering together in a protest to get the intervention thrown out of the school.
Wow.
Collective action against yoga and meditation. I was like, okay, let's talk about this, right? This is the juicy stuff.
Exactly.
This is the interesting stuff. And one of the things that they let me know was they said, through the use of technology like YouTube, these kids schooled me. They sat me down. They're 12 years old. They're like, look, I have YouTube. I have social media. And through the use of technology, I know the way that people look at me in this body. I know, right, going back to that story about what that administrator said to me.
Yeah.
They were like, these are the things that people say to me. So I'm experiencing racism. I'm experiencing oppression, right? I'm experiencing pain and suffering that has to do with who I am, my identity. Then you want me to sit down. You want me to meditate. You want me to close my eyes. You want me to go within. You want me to yoga it out. And they're telling me it is bringing me into more close contact with my pain and my suffering. I'm hurting more.
Interesting.
And I'm not being given the tools to articulate this in the classroom or being shown how can I be empowered to do something about this situation that I'm in, because I am aware, but I'm being disempowered. And that was like the game changer for me, because then I realized, okay, social justice, right, is what they're asking for. Well-being is what they need. And the idea arose for me that maybe the phenomenon of social justice and well-being were one and the same thing. In that if you are providing for someone's physiological well-being, right? If you're providing for someone's mental health support, and you are supporting them in the relationships that are required for them to be empowered and autonomous, to self-actualize, to love themselves, that's social justice.
Deep breath there. So this idea of the science of social justice that has a strong kind of a connection to well-being. And so not only are you inspired by this unique finding in your dissertation and your field work, but then you also end up developing like a map, like the systems-based awareness map, the SBAM as you kind of call it. You and I met through Daniel Dr. Daniel Siegel. Special shout out to you, Dan, for just bringing together such amazing people through the MUI Council. Special shout out to the MUI Council. So you joined the Garrison Institute Fellowship Program that I'm invited to direct, and at that time, I had just finished my doctorate program. So your doctoral journey and my doctoral journey were pretty interlinked in some significant ways. And as you know, in my research, I studied healing-centered education, which was a question around what were the relationships, the connections, the missed connections between mindfulness-based education and social justice education, which really was kind of like your field study in practice. So for me, as I was asking this question, what is the relationship between these two fields? I was fascinated by, on the one hand, in the mindfulness community, you had people zenning out, doing all kinds of yoga poses in pursuit of calm, well-being, but also escape from the trauma, tension,
That's real.
and turmoil that people in the social justice community were trying to rebel against or reform or change. So I saw this huge gap. On the one hand, folks were in the social justice education field, like banging their heads against these systems of racism, patriarchy, classism, all kinds of systems of oppression, and experiencing incredible levels of burnout. And then over here, you have people who are experiencing all kinds of levels of well-being,
Right.
yet escaping the very structures that these folks over here were trying to ameliorate change or respond to. So I saw that tension, and then my question changed, because what was common in both of those fields, those communities, was healing and trauma.
Yeah.
And so then I began to ask, is there such a thing as a healing-centered pedagogy? Are there approaches to education that have healing at the center? And that opened an inquiry, looking at indigenous ways of being, looking at restorative justice, looking at somatic practice, looking at mindfulness, looking at social emotional learning, and so many other, like what I called in my dissertation the healing and restorative turn in education. And you're very much part of that turn, right? Your work in neuroscience and linguistics and anthropology contributes to this huge turn. So as I was sitting with your work at the Garrison Institute, I remember so vividly on a call with you during one of our one-on-one calls. I'm the Garrison Institute director, you're a fellow, and we're just sitting with this dense idea that you have, the SBAM, systems-based awareness map, grounded on this larger theory around the science of social justice. And you're talking to me, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is huge for the field.
Yeah, but remember, this was before, when you were talking to me, this was before, I wanna like roll it back, because it was like, I remember I came to you, and this was when I was in my postdoc in neurology. Right? So I'm doing this like real intense deep dive at Oregon Health Science University. It's in a medical hospital, right? And so I'm literally surrounded by mostly MDs and clinicians. Sometimes, the folks that I'm learning from are literally neurosurgeons that I'm sitting in the room with, and I'm listening to them discuss pathology and trauma to the most, sometimes, minute degree, right? In terms of like the microbiology of the phenomena that they are looking at, right? Or, we're talking about like head injuries and things like that, right? And in all of these different cases, right, where I'm like really diving into psychophysiological measurement, fMRIs and EEG and things like that, I'm thinking to myself, I don't hear anything about how the bodies that are being treated, about their identity. Because some of these folks are coming to this hospital because they have been injured, they have been wounded, or they are experiencing pathology directly in relationship to their experience of race. So where is that correlation with the trauma? And I remember, coming to you, and you said something like, yo, sis, have you ever thought about taking, I had this big whiteboard in my office, and I showed it to you, and there was like all these different words from like biology and psychology and anthropology. And you were just like, okay, whoa. You can't take the word cloud, right? Nobody, like, I can make sense of it. You could make sense of it because you were talking to me all the time. You were like, what about a diagram of some kind? How are you going to, you invited me to become cohesive. And also, I had been talking to you in the context of the Garrison Institute, shout out to all the fellows, about my identity as an artist. You remember that?
Yeah, vividly.
And I felt like it had been suppressed, and you were like, there's no reason for that. Like, use your artistic lens and bring that to all of these concepts and generate something that you can show to another person. That is really, you might have been the first person to use the term. You were like, map out for people. You're finding that there is this relationship between all the phenomena that is arising from the body and all of the phenomena that are occurring in the world. How will you show this? to people.
Mm-hmm.
And then the evening of, no, the day of the January 6th insurrection.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
And we were on a Zoom call,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden, one of the Garrison fellows starts looking like kind of, shocked and stunned. And we put it on screen share, and we watched live together the storming of the Capitol. And just the disturbance and the shock and the horror of it all, we processed live together. And literally that night, because I couldn't sleep, I was like so riled up, I rolled out of bed and I went in my office, and I had a great big white Post-it pad, and I started to draw out a diagram which became a map of human awareness. And that, because of this invitation that you gave me to, make it cohesive, that was when the systems-based awareness map was born.
The systems-based awareness map is born, and when you show it to me, or at least like as I'm seeing inklings, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be huge. So could you just briefly walk me through the SBAM and the various levels of awareness that are tied to it? In particular, one of the major takeaways for me was not just the model, but this idea that trauma and healing are bio, psycho, social, and physical phenomena that impact how we interact with the world and with ourselves. And so I would love for the community to hear a little bit more about the map, and then how you ended up, leveraging the map to explore visual arts with the Museum of Modern Art. And then later developed, or in the process of developing, artificial intelligence is connected to the map.
Yeah.
So just really juicy stuff here, sister. And I call you sis, and with so much respect, Dr. King. And I'll also kind of back up for a second and say just thank you, and the incredible opportunity to be a thought partner with you, and as you know, with the rest of the fellows,
Yes.
like how rich, thinking about Selma's post-traumatic growth, thinking about Nico, grief,
Yes.
and climate grief, and
Yeah.
Shelley and Justin,
And Andrew's framework around technology for the good. So influential.
And the new round of fellows too, the new cohort. Just so special shout out to the Garrison Institute, a fellowship program. So yeah, this idea of the SBAM, the system-based awareness map, and tell me a little bit about it, the levels of it, and then how you ended up moving it into a tool to, on the one hand, explore consciousness, which is what an original inquiry and concept that you were curious about.
Yes.
And then the ways in which you leveraged visual arts to explore the map.
Yeah. So I recall when I was, you gave me this invitation to look at other scholars' models from a visual perspective to see how I could organize my thoughts. And I happened upon Brofenbrenner's ecological model, really exploring the way that different systems within our ecologies impact each other. And I was really inspired by this mandala of concentric circles of systems really enfolding one another. So literally, the night of the insurrection, because I was like in a state, I thought, let me go into my practice. And I sat down on a meditation cushion in my office. And, sometimes meditation practitioners talk about this phenomena of dropping in. And that just really describes when you reach a place of, for me, centeredness and calm and stillness inside of the body. So within this place of stillness, and this is what I have been trained in. I did a year-long training as a meditation teacher at Spirit Rock in Marin, California. And part of that training is like really noticing the arising of phenomena, various phenomena within one's consciousness. And I noticed the arising of feelings, feelings which are the narrativization, right? The words that the brain is producing in order to give concept to your emotions. I noticed sensations, I noticed memories, and the thing that occurred to me was, oh, all of this phenomena is happening. What does Dan like to say? He says, within this skin encased body.
this skin, yeah.
With his skin suit reference, right? But then it really dawned on me. I was like, okay, no, but let's take this seriously for a moment. Let me really apprehend all that I can be aware of from the skin within. And I placed that as like a layer of awareness that I called internal awareness in one concentric circle. And then as I proceeded in my meditation, I noticed that some of the thoughts and the emotions and sensations and memories that I was having were directly related to how I perceive my intersectional identity. So then it arose for me, okay, perhaps I'll place the next ring of awareness, I'll call it identity awareness. Because identity awareness really relates to not only our intersectional identity, but our relationship to ancestors, past, present, and future, and also epigenetics, right? The way that our environment is really shaping the way that our genes are turning on and off. Genes that have been, that have arisen in us through the vehicle of our ancestors. So that was the next layer of the map. And then going on another layer outside of that, which I termed bodily awareness, is our awareness of our experience of health and vitality, right? When I sat down today, I think you asked me how I was feeling. I said, I'm feeling alive, a lot of aliveness, right? So when we are feeling states of disease or sickness, it has a certain sensateness, right, in the body. And those were the 3 layers of awareness that I had housing, right, the skin within in this diagram. But I was in meditation, so I was completely still. And the brain, right, I really love the way that Antonio Damasio, he's a very famous neuroscientist, he talks about the brain as a cartographer. So the brain is constantly making maps, a map, it's mapping out for us our internal experience, everything that is happening from the skin within. And we call that in neuroscience interoceptive awareness. That became another layer of the map. But then the brain also has to, at all times, right, it has this map making of what's going on in our bodies, and then it is mapping everything that is happening around us, and it is constantly weaving that together. That's called exteroceptive awareness. And this exteroceptive awareness is what allows you to feel the wind or the sun on your skin. Notice differences in temperature in the room, right? To really be aware of what is happening in the world around you. So I realized that also in neuroscience, we know that when the body is at rest and not moving, it demonstrates one kind of activity in terms of how the blood is flowing through the different regions of the brain. The minute that you are in relationship with another person, right? So if I was by myself and not moving, I would have one type of brain activity. And then in relationship with you, the social functions of the brain come online, right? The brain is a social brain. So when we enact our sense of self into the world and I move my body, right? I move my body through space. I shift. I have to have an awareness of where my body is in space so I'm not constantly bumping into things. You're expressing agency by moving your body, by behaving and being in relationship with another person. That brings a whole nother layer of awareness into the mind. So then I called that layer of the map awareness of self as enacted, because we enact ourselves upon the world, right? And then the very final layer of the map is this exploration of how it is, and this is really coming from that experience of the insurrection. That insurrection that happened in Washington, D.C., I wasn't there. You weren't there. But we felt deeply impacted by it, right? So all the phenomena that are happening in our environment, in our society, and in the culture that surrounds us, we have an awareness of that. And that is where we begin to tap into collective awareness or collective consciousness, right? Doesn't matter if something is happening clear around the world, which we saw with COVID. Something can start out, a phenomena clear around the world, and then we're affected by it. Once it enters into our awareness, right, it's triggering all manner of, as you said, biopsychosocial phenomenon, right? So that's the entirety of the map. And as I was developing it, I got an email one day shortly after this that stunned me. And it was from someone who's now become a very dear friend of mine, Jackie Armstrong, who's the head of research at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And in the email, she reaches out and she says, you know, Dr. King, we've been watching your videos about the science of social justice inside of the museum. I was like, what? You know about me? She says, we're curious if you would be willing to do a collaboration with us. And the offer was, pick one work of art from inside of the museum and develop a meditation that allows folks to go on a journey into the art while simultaneously they are learning about the science of social justice.
The map.
She didn't know about the map yet, right? This was just the science of social justice. So that was our first collaboration together. And then, as you know, we did subsequent collaborations with Dr. Dan Segal and Orlando Villarraga, who is another one of the Garrison Institute Fellows. So Jackie was really on this journey with me of watching the science of social justice turn into an exploration of this map of human awareness, the systems-based awareness map. And she so generously, right, because this was around the time that Trump was about to be elected, but this was prior to it. And the museum said, you know, we really want to put something into the world that is going to inspire hope because of these enormous changes, you know, and everything we had been through in the pandemic, with the death of our brother George Floyd. And right, it was just like, you remember, we recall, it was like week after week after week, these incidences of extraordinary violence and brutality against the Black community. And this renewed movement for racial justice that and Black Lives Matter, right, which was this social phenomenon. It was this global phenomenon that was like sweeping the streets, right? So the idea was, let's put something out into the world to inspire hope around this time. And that was when Dr. Dan Segal and Orlando and myself got together and we created an event, The Science and Hope of Justice is, I think, what it was called. And at this event, the museum asked us pick out 8 pieces of visual art from our collection. And Orlando is this incredible composer, sonic healing experience, contemplative wizard, I want to call him. If you're watching this, Orlando, I see you. And so Orlando's job was to really create a sonic healing landscape for Dan and myself to be able to invite the audience into relationship with these 8 works of art that we felt really represented something about this moment, this historical moment that we were in. And then Dan and I would frame it talking about the neurobiology of hope. The neurobiology of hope and justice. That was the initial framing. And I remember what was wild was when we set about putting this into the world, a representative of the United Nations caught wind. You remember because you, I'm now remembering, you did the introduction and the ending of that event. So you remember the representative of the United Nations came, and it was their, I believe, their 50th anniversary. So then the program was then sponsored by the United Nations.
I recall.
Right, and put out to the world as this global resource. And that was extraordinary.
Very much so. Yeah, you know, and we'll share the SBAM, the image, with the community as you're talking, and so you know, what an honor to be able to take the SBAM, take the science of social justice theory, and begin to play with art. And I've seen you kind of really evolve in that way. I'm wondering if we could just slow down even more right now and do a short practice.
Yeah.
Just so that people can really kind of take in all of what we just held. And then we'll go into part 2.
I love that.
You know, because part 2 is another voyage into you becoming a tech founder, you taking your robust understanding of the human mind, the human body, and with not just, as we discussed earlier, linguistics, anthropology, Black studies, neuroscience, and you now making technology and artificial intelligence that integrates all of that, you know. So just excited there. So I'm wondering if you would invite us and hold us in a short, 2 to 3 minute contemplative practice, and I'll practice with you.
I love that invitation. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's nice to slow down. So for those of you who are listening and gathered together with us today, I'm just loving mi hermano's invitation to just like slow down in this moment. So wherever you are, whether that's seated or standing up, taking a moment to really settle into your space in a way that feels supportive and compassionate. And some of you may choose to close your eyes if that is helpful in settling in. And if you're seated down, you may rest your hands in your lap. And we'll take a moment right now and enter into a practice of embodied collective solidarity. And it's super easy to do. We'll take 3 deep breaths together. And when you're finished taking those 3 deep inhales and exhales, returning to a natural cadence and rhythm of breath. This practice is completely optional, by the way. If you wish to simply bear witness to this practice, that is a completely valid way of engaging with the practice. Taking a moment here and noticing the rhythm of the breath through the body, and bringing your awareness to the very bottoms of the feet. What do you notice? Noticing the right foot and the left foot, or whatever area of your body is meeting with the earth. Seeing if there's any difference between the right and left-hand side of the body. Allowing gravity to hold you in this moment, to anchor and root you into relationship with the earth. Whether your eyes are closed or open, as you bring your awareness into contact with the body, you may experience a deepening of your awareness of your thoughts, your feelings, the sensations of temperature and lightness or heaviness. Expanding or contracting that is arising in different areas of the body. And as we're making this contact using our awareness of the body, see if you can bring to mind a person, animal, place, or object that reminds you of compassion. A person, animal, place, or object that reminds you of compassion. And in your mind's eye, bring them into the room or wherever you are, bring them close to you. So we're using our attention now to guide our awareness in the direction of compassion. Continuing to notice the breath as it flows through the body. And we'll just take a moment here of pause. And notice if there's anything about your relationship with the body that shifts when we use our awareness to create contact, relationship with compassion. If there are any areas of the body which begin to soften or feel more open or alive, taking notice of that. And if that's not the case, that's okay too. Simply by bringing our awareness to our bodies with the intention of being in relationship with compassion, we can begin to cultivate profound shifts, embodied transformation, and we can move ever so gently in the direction of healing. Taking one last deep breath here. And if you've had your eyes closed, you might begin to slowly and gently open up the eyelids. And you may find it supportive to turn your head gently to the right, if that's accessible, and then rotate the head and the neck and look up, look over, to the left. This is called orienting. It's how you take in the space around you and notice if anything seems a little different. You can even look behind you if that feels supportive. Thank you so much for your practice.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, sister. It just felt right to invite you to facilitate that. You know, we just really held you and your story, and there's so much more that we'll dive into in part 2 of this discussion. Just wanted to thank you for allowing us to just to be with you in all of that, and knowing that that was just a fraction
Yeah, yeah.
of who you are and what your thinking entails. So looking forward to jumping in part 2 and really setting the table so that people understand not just the kind of scientist you are, not just the kind of mother, sister, daughter, activist, mindfulness teacher you've been, but the kind of business leader you're trying to emerge into. So stay tuned for part 2.